Here we go with part 2 of The Outsiders, followed by First Dog on the Moon.
It's far more than symbolic. This affects industry, it affects everything.
And we should always give 100% credence to everything politicians utter. They're essentially, look at it.
If we don't, Roger, where are we? I mean, we delegate this responsibility.
Well, you might ask where one of the signatories is, and that would be Nick Clegg, and there's a good chance he'll be out of Parliament at the next election if you go by the polls. The Liberal Democrats are polling 9% at the moment. UKIP is polling at about 20%. If the Conservatives are in coalition with anybody, it's more likely to be UKIP. Yeah, and do you think they're going to go through this? They want the end of Windsor on this. They want the countryside restored to the way it was. They hate this stuff.
Empty symbolism, Sabine?
I do have a bit of a problem with the worshipping of consensus, of political consensus, because I don't think that that's necessarily always the best way to achieve good policy outcomes. It often goes hand in hand, I think, with worshipping the idea that what the majority thinks is automatically right. And you see that break down on issues that are important, like tax reform. You know, tax reform is so difficult to do because somebody is always going to be worse off by it. It's almost guaranteed. And when you sort of worship this majority consensus ideal, then you don't have those difficult debates that lead to actually the best way forward on a lot of policy issues.
Although sometimes and tax is an interesting example. We can't really have the discussion because of the politicisation. We divide on it too readily, and that gets in the way of having an honest chat about something like the GST, for example.
But I think if you have the argument and play it out in a public way, then it leads to more informed choices, people making more informed choices. Because they've been able to hear all the different sides.
If we could have the conversation without that sort of intractable division around the conversation, if we could have a conversation that could truly meet in the middle.
And part of that involves respecting positions of expertise in that conversation. So the worldwide challenge, particularly in developed countries about climate change, is a really disappointing lack of respect for the expertise of scientists. And so if the public conversation and the one that's led by politicians is a responsible one and is a really rich one, then it can be, as Sabine indicates, a consensus that isn't a bland consensus, but one that's a really informed one and has a productive outcome.
And I just want to say, we have this issue whereby, people don't like the negativity that is in politics at the moment, but I think as well it's because there's no outcomes associated with it. So it's just yelling with no achievements.
Outcomes would be a distinct advantage.
Outflows of money.
We have an outcome here, I'm afraid, and that's the clock, which has just ticked against this. Thank you to our outsiders this morning, Esther Anatolides, Director of Regional Arts Victoria, Roger Franklin, online editor of Quadrant, and Sabine Wolfe, Senior Researcher from JWS Research. It's almost 5 to 10. Patriots. I'm Jonathan Green, and this is First Dog on the Moon's Guide to Modern Living. Welcome to number 72 in our 865-part series, What is Happening in the Real Australia? This week, First Dog on the Moon is travelling about the nation in the ABC van reporting from the road. We only have one van, so we hope he brings it back soon. Are you there, Dog?
Mr. Green, hello. Yes, I'm here. Right now, we're passing through the adorable little town of Aussie Battler. We're travelling light. It's just me and my team of producers, makeup artists, technicians, sound lighting and camera people, and the woman who combs the goats. Now we're heading along the highway of democracy towards the heart of modern Australia, the bustling regional centre of working Familyville. And we should be there, I'd say, in about 8 hours or 1950, whichever comes first. Now, I do need to let you know, Mr. Green, we did have to leave the ABC van back at the last servo. It threw a bolt right through the efficiency dividend and basically completely shat itself. There was bias all over the place. It was sickening.
Oh, is everyone okay?
Oh, yes, yes. No, we're all fine. There was a spilt latte and someone almost choked on their quinoa friand, but we've workshopped our feelings and everyone's quite recovered.
Oh, well, that's good to know.
Well, yes, yes. Amazingly, Mr. Green, there was a good government bus standing there by the side of the road. Now, none of us had ever seen one, and certainly no one I know has travelled in one. So we just hopped aboard and we're on our way. I can tell you right now, this bus of good government is hurtling through rural and regional Australia, piloted by Tansy from the ABC's People and Culture Department, and I'm confident everything's going to be fine. It's very well decked out as well. There's a painting of the Queen in the loo and a gold bust of Alan Jones, which is next to the Gillian Triggs dartboard.
First off, are you telling me that you're driving Prime Minister Abbott's actual bus of good government, the official one?
Oh, well, yes. I mean, it didn't actually have anyone in it, and we needed a bus. It does belong to the taxpayers, you know, just like the ABC. So, well, we may have just gotten in and then driven off. Well, and look, I can tell you, Mr. Green, it probably wasn't a good idea. The thing's clearly been in storage for like forever, probably since the 50s. The tyres barely inflated. I don't think anyone's ever even driven it. There's only about 5 kilometres on the odometer, and even so, it still appears to have been in like a demolition derby. It's covered in dents and crunches. Even the fuzzy dice are going bald. It's blowing smoke like you wouldn't believe, and we couldn't even drive off to start with because the windows are all covered in tin foil. Oh my goodness. Wait a minute, someone's just thrown an old age pensioner under the bus. This is awful. Oh, no, wait, it's okay. It's Philip Ruddock. Someone's thrown the government whip under the bus of good government, and that's about as good as this extremely laboured analogy is going to get. Anyway, Mr. Green, I have a couple of other things to report about opposition leader bums flapping.
And that was rural and regional correspondent F on the Moon. This has been Jonathan Green's Guide to Modern Living.
Well, there you go. So Tony Abbott decided that there's a bit of a mood in Australia at the moment against the idea of Muslim countries executing Christians. And Indonesia is this thing called a Muslim country. And in the Indonesian jails at the moment, there's a couple of Australians who are ethnically Asian looking, but they are actually Australian citizens. And once upon a time, a bit over 10 years ago, they cooked up a plan to go to Indonesia, to Bali, with 7 accomplices, and buy a heap of heroin and bring it back to Australia. And one of these Bali Nine's children, fathers, decided to go and tell the federal police that his child was planning to do this, and the silly father thought that the federal police might actually arrest the bloke at the airport. But instead of that, the federal police told the Indonesian police, and the Indonesian police arrested him in Indonesia with a big heap of heroin. And Indonesia's decided to have a bit of a clearing of its people on death row, and they're shooting them in batches at the moment. So Tony Abbott doesn't like the idea that Muslims are allowed to make the law in their own country and shoot Christians, because he wants to go to war against ISIL. And the big rumour, according to The Australian, which is the right-wing newspaper, Murdoch's right-wing newspaper, is that Tony Abbott asked the Australian Chief of Defence Staff, what a good idea could it be if we sent 3,500 Australians over to Iraq and let them fight without any NATO or American assistance, just because ISIL are a bunch of godless death cultists. I don't believe the editor of The Australian would have allowed that story to go through unless he was already in possession of some means or manner of proving it. And I'd say that during the following week, that will leak out. And Tony Abbott will be deeply up shit creek because he will have had his military fantasy gland revealed. Other things that Tony Abbott's been doing during the week have been a little bit ill-advised as well. He's decided that because some Australians who've gone overseas to fight with ISIL are in receipt of Australian social security payments of some kind. Now, I don't know whether it's doles or pensions or allowances or what, but some of them are getting some Australian money. And for a long time, Australians on the pension have had the idea that, well, why live in Australia and struggle when you can go to somewhere like Bali and you're relatively rich on the Australian pension? So they go out of Australia, live somewhere else with a servant and a nice house, and only come back to Australia to fill in the forms once a year. Now, maybe Tony Abbott's been told that somebody is in receipt of a social security pension and they're actually in Syria shooting at Australian aeroplanes or something. So he's decided to link being on the social security with being either a homegrown secret terrorist wannabe or going over to Syria and fighting on the side of ISIL. At the same time as Twiglet Forrest's idea for making everybody who gets any kind of federal government income support, that means old age pensioners and disability pensioners as well as white unemployed people, not just the blackfellas, making anybody who gets any government income support take it in the form of an electronic card that won't let them get cash. So they're not going to be able to, for example, save up to buy a car because, you know, they've got to buy it from somebody who's got a government cash machine. So it's an attempt to play to the extreme right-wing, crony, capitalist, corrupt, fascist dictatorship side of the Liberal Party. And I don't think it'll play very well with all of the pensioners that the Liberal Party relies on voting for them. So that's just what's been going on this week in the land of Abbotania. Philip Ruddock got the spear. Tony Abbott doesn't seem to have any clear idea of what to do about anything. His own party are leaking against him, and he's trying to throw the blame onto the usual cast of characters, the pensioners, the double bludgers, ethnic minorities and blackfellas. Oh yeah, and over there in the excited, in the excited states of Western Australia, they're coming up with the idea that they want to get all the Aborigines off the reservations, the traditional homelands. That's my new drone. That's the Warble drone. They don't want the Aborigines to live on the traditional homelands because if the Aborigines live on the traditional homelands, that's the screen on the transmitter where it sends its pickies back to. If they live on the traditional homelands, somebody has to pay them the dole. What they don't seem to take account of is the fact that the reason they can't live in the traditional manner on the traditional homelands is that whitefellas agriculture and whitefellas pastoral industry and whitefellas mining industry has destroyed the ecology of the land. And we actually said to them, oh, look, you guys don't want to live in the suburbs because you get drunk because it's such a sad place for you to be. We don't want you to live on the properties which we're trying to farm or on the mines. We want you to live on your traditional homelands. Now the West Australian government says, no, we can't pay you to live out there because there's no economic or agricultural reason for you to be living there. We've destroyed your landscape. You have to come and be a drunk in the suburbs. Sometimes it's really disappointing and depressing to be an Australian. There's so much bullshit being done in the name of the society that I live on the outside edge of. Warble's on a lot to YouTube. Isn't it a lovely drone I got for my birthday? Ciao.